Okay, colleagues, let's start with the ancient Greeks. So, what is the foundational question of political philosophy for the ancient Greeks? In many ways, we could take even one step further back and ask, what is the foundational question of philosophy or just rational thinking or thinking about the world in general? Right? We tend to think that maybe rationality or capacity for speech or capacity for conscious thought is unique among human beings. Some question about that in terms of contemporary cognitive science, but still, human beings uniquely, maybe, potentially uniquely among the animals, don't only exist, but also think about their existence. So what is this first thought? Where does philosophy begin? Or even before that, where does thinking begin? Well, you could ask a foundational question, maybe the most foundational question as far as these go. What is the human place in the universe? What is our place in the universe? So Kant very famously talks about the three foundational questions. What should I do? What can I hope for? What can I know? And these three questions, Kant says, can be reduced to the fourth most fundamental question. What is a human being? Right? In this sense, what is the human place in the structure of the entire universe? And presumably, ever since human beings were capable of posing questions, presumably, as far as we can imagine, human beings have always asked those kinds of questions. And this inquiry possibly begins within the sphere of what we would today call myth or religion. So myth or religion, mythological or religious traditions. Now, more specifically, when you ask, what is the human place in the cosmos? Kind of an essential part, a foundational part of that question is this universe our home? Is there a place for a human being in the universe? Is this world, as the Greeks would put it, is it a cosmos, which means an orderly place? We get the word cosmetic from here. Or is this world a chaos? Is this world essentially chaotic or cosmetic, right? Is this world, in the words of Immanuel Kant, the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter, or is it some kind of natural or divine, or natural and divine harmony at the same time, which is somehow made for human beings, or at least human beings have a place in it? Or are we thrown into this world doomed to be alienated and unhappy? More to be said about this, but let's start somewhere. So within the mythological or religious tradition, especially for the ancient Greeks, in the works of the poets, such as Homer or Hesiod, there is this understanding that there's a single divinely sanctioned order in the universe. It's both natural and moral, right? So there's, if you want, there's one committee of Olympian gods presided over by Zeus who order the natural events of the universe. And also these gods somehow preside over or oversee matters of morality and justice, right? So it is the will of the gods that the seasons change, and it is also the will of the gods that humans don't lie, don't steal, pay taxes, etc., right? And within the mythological or religious tradition, this is probably supposed to be a matter of revelation, divine revelation. So Homer, for example, is a prophet. So prophet or prophecy, right? Prophecy, we're talking about prophecy in this sense. A prophet is somebody who speaks for the gods, right? The Iliad begins, the first line of the Iliad is, sing goddess the wrath of Achilles. So Homer is invoking the muse. Homer invokes the muse, asks praise to the muse, so that the goddess takes over his mortal body and speak through his mouth. Notice that there is a certain kind of pessimism embedded within this mythological or religious tradition. The idea that human mind is limited. Human beings, without the help of the gods, cannot really know the deep fundamental foundational truths about the world. Homer needs a muse to inspire him in order to be able to say something true about the universe, right? And within this tradition, very much it's important that this world is a cosmos, and humans have a place in it. And in an important respect, it is our task, our duty in life to obey the social conventions, right? The norms of justice. In some sense, we could understand by this approach, there's a certain problem, there's a certain uncritical acceptance of tradition. Again, you see, the prophet just tells you what the gods think. The prophet doesn't give any reasons. So this is, if you want, uncritical or pre-critical stage. So essential, integral to this mythological or religious tradition, this idea of the limitation of human intellect, and therefore, as a consequence, in some sense, mythology or religion in its own terms, at least in this frame of reference, seems to suggest a necessity of uncritical acceptance, belief. You believe without justification, maybe because justification cannot be given, because human intellect is limited. So there's this important uncritical element, uncritical or maybe pre-critical element. The prophet is inspired, and the prophet seeks to inspire without necessarily giving any kind of justification. So next, chronologically, and I mean, Homer and Hesiod represent the oldest traditions probably which had existed as oral tradition, right? Before they were written down. So this is ancient tradition vis-a-vis the Greek life. Important parallels could be drawn to other religious traditions, especially to the Abrahamic tradition in Christianity or Judaism or Islam. We'll get there in due course. But let's proceed. So we begin with the myth, and then chronologically, we have the appearance of philosophy. So traditionally, the first philosopher is supposed to be Thales of Miletus. So Greek philosophy begins on the western coast of Asia Minor, today Turkey. Natural philosophy seeks to explain the world in rational terms. We don't really have the full writings of the so-called pre-Socratic philosophers, Ionians, Milesians, Eleatics. We don't really have them in full, surviving up until this day. Only fragments survive. So we have to do a lot of reconstruction. But as far as we can tell, natural philosophy seeks to uncover, again, objective regularities. Regularities which are discoverable through experience, through reason. And if this is uncritical and in some sense, I want to say private, because it is the muse one-on-one that inspires a particular prophet, natural philosophy begins as a deeply public enterprise. So a philosopher like Thales proposes a hypothesis, and the philosopher needs to talk to other people and to try to convince them of the truth of his hypothesis, right? And so, very importantly, once we get to natural philosophy, we're talking about regularities, and these regularities are discoverable by reason. Let me just give one example. Thales is said to have predicted a solar eclipse of the sun. So, whereas the mythological or religious tradition would say that the sun is blotted out, maybe because gods or Zeus is angry because of some great transgression that has happened, and Zeus is in wrath. But Thales, again, trying to reconstruct ancient astronomy, right? Thales looks at a particular regularity in the celestial motions and is able to predict the eclipse, which would kind of suggest that the eclipse happens independently of the human world. And possibly even independently of the arbitrary will of the gods. Right? Instead of the arbitrary will of the gods, now we have a necessary regularity, a law of nature, if you want. And But again, so we are talking about a regularity which is discoverable by reason and is has it's a verifiable element. So it is discoverable and verifiable. This. And therefore, if this was uncritical, here, because now we can verify, we can engage in critical reflection, not just take on faith, but actually ask for arguments. Now, before we proceed, let's ask this question. So is the world chaos or cosmos? Well, for Homer, within his prophecy, the world is a cosmos. The world is cosmetic. It is our home, and Zeus makes sure that justice is done one way or another, that evil people are punished, or maybe at least their children are punished, and good people prosper, or maybe at least their children prosper. So there is some cosmic justice. But does it have to be the case? Well, in principle, since ancient times, we know of other traditions, other religious, and that's the problem with religious thought. There are many different religions, there are many different prophets. And in principle, even some of the ancient Greek myths seem to suggest that gods do not necessarily care about us all that much. Or maybe evil, or maybe even that gods are evil or cruel. That's a possibility which is already embedded in the mythological or religious tradition. But once we get to natural philosophy, this becomes even more apparent. Because if the eclipse is the expression of the divine wrath of Zeus, you can say, well, you can hope that Zeus's wrath is justified. If it's just a natural regularity, then maybe there is no deep reason for it. Maybe gods don't exist. Or maybe if gods exist, they do not care about us. It's a deeply disconcerting fact. And we can begin to see how within the natural philosophers, at least already implicitly, we get a disjunction, a potential for a disjunction between the laws of nature, Physis in Greek, and the laws of society. So both are laws, and the word law is the same, but I hope you can see the difference, a huge gap between the idea of the law of nature and the law of society, the moral law. The law of nature represents the essential structure of the world, what the world is. The law of society tells us what we should do, right? And again, within the mythological tradition, these were tied together, but in the natural tradition, there's a possibility that the two are different. Now, but the natural philosophers, the physiologoi, does not really thematize this question. Now, social, moral, political philosophy proper begins with a group under this umbrella term. It's not really a school, so take this word with a grain of salt, with a group of which has come to be known over the ages as the Sophists. And the Sophists were the first social philosophers because they explicitly asked this question about the relationship between the laws of nature and laws of society. And specifically, they were open to the possibility that there's a radical disjunction between the two. That the laws of nature and the laws of society are somehow independent or maybe even opposed to one another, right? And so a way to make this maybe more concrete is to talk about the question of justice as defined by the social norms and individual advantage. So this is basically what society tells me I should do, right? Society calls this justice. But there's also my individual question of my individual happiness or well-being or prospering or advantage. Could these two come apart? And so before we talk about the philosophers and these philosophies in detail, let's just in 1 minute look at the broad overview. So you could say that if the laws of society are not rooted in nature, like they were in Homer, right? It could be that they are a mere matter of convention. There's nothing essential. There's nothing natural or changeless about human laws. They are merely conventional. Human laws are man-made. they are not divine or natural. And maybe they are good and actually in our interest. It's one possibility. But maybe they are bad and not in our interest. It's a disconcerting and dangerous possibility. A third possibility, a hopeful possibility, and this would be an attempt to bring back the social philosophy in line with the natural philosophy, is to sort of go back to the philosophy of nature and to try to find the laws of society within the laws of nature, right? So it would be an attempt to locate a natural grounding, a natural basis for social laws in the fundamental nature of reality. So these I would imagine there are more possibilities, but these are the three fundamental possibilities from which social philosophy, social, political, moral philosophy proper begins in ancient Greece. And these are the three approaches that we're going to discuss in detail in the coming segments.